13 ABC. Conklin and Company with 13 ABC Action News anchor Lee Conklin. First with what's happening behind the headlines. And Take 3, our panel of political analysts.
Morning, everybody, and welcome into another edition of Conklin and Company, coming to you from a different location here at 13 ABC while our set has some work done to it, and we're glad that you could join us once again this morning. Coming up a little bit later in the program, we're going to celebrate Toledo's crown jewel, the newest one, Toledo's Huntington Center, now recognized locally, nationally, and globally as one of the best sports and entertainment venues going. We'll talk with Steve Miller, the general manager at the Huntington Center, a little bit later on. But first, school bells already ringing for some Ohio students, and most will be in classes within the next week or two. And no better time to welcome in the superintendent of Ohio's public schools, the Ohio Department of Education, Dr. Richard Ross. And Dr. Ross, thanks very much for making the trip up from Bowling Green. You stopped at BG this week, and then you come back to Toledo and back to Northwest Ohio. Your roots, we appreciate it.
It is my roots, and it was good to come back to Northwest Ohio. I'm an alumni. My PhD was at Bowling Green, and to meet with folks from the university and students there, and the president was very nice. We followed it up with a visit with the Wood County superintendents and later the Lucas County superintendents, and then visited the Toledo School for the Arts, which was just an amazing thing to watch and engage with.
Right, so public schools, charter schools, the performing, or the School for the Performing Arts, you got to get that name right because, schools would say, hey, make sure that one's right. So you got them all covered in this journey into Northwest Ohio, but also at Bryan, I believe out of Glandorf. So this is really a big part of home for you, is it not?
That is. Northwest Ohio is where I was raised, and really started my superintendency career both at Ottawa for 3 years and then later at Bryan for 4 years.
Dr. Ross, when we talk about education, it seems as if this is cliche, but it really is true. The one constant is change when it comes to education. And I want to start with one of, is this your initiative, the third grade reading guarantee that you're really focusing on this year? Tell us about it.
Well, we are, and it comes from the governor's office and later approved by the legislature, and certainly prior to becoming state superintendent, I did work for the governor for 14 months and was involved with this. I just think this is hugely important. As I look at the data, both from the Casey Foundation and the Manhattan Institute, that paints a picture of what happens if our students don't have this skill by third grade. We know that 60% of our high school dropouts, 60% of them are not able to read at third grade level by third grade. So my premise and my belief strongly is that somehow through early childhood, parent involvement, and the third grade reading guarantee, by intervening and identifying these students that have these reading issues early and providing an intervention, that we really can turn this around and give them the skills. Because the first years, kindergarten through third grade is learning to read. After that, it's fourth grade on, it's reading to learn. And it's so important because if the students have the ability and skill to read, they control their own learning in the future. And they start to create a feeling of hopefulness about themselves. And if they don't, then they don't have that feeling. And the Gallup organization has been doing surveys on hopefulness, and they've been doing it at fifth grade. And they found out that a student that's hopeful about themselves, their skills, and their future is a better predictor of college success than ACT scores. And it's amazing to me. So
hopefulness, confidence.
Confidence about themselves, because it's not artificial, it's not fake. They have these skills and ability. And so as I look at this is really a non-negotiable for me. I think that, and it may be a few years before we get this turned around, but when I look at achievement gaps at the high school, when I look at graduation rates, when I look at the remediation rate, where 30% of our high schoolers need to be remediated before they go to college, I say, well, we can do some short-term fixes on that, but the long-term fix is make sure that every one of our students is able to read at the third grade level and control their own learning from that point on. It's just something so important. And I have people that talk to me about the social stigma about what if retention, what if. The way the law was written, the retention would be in reading, not necessarily the whole grade level. And I talked to superintendents today, and I shared with them that You know, when I was in Reynoldsburg in the Columbus area, we had 3rd, 4th grade reading classes forever. So if there's a concern about stigma of retention because they aren't up to the skills in reading, that's an easy fix for a leader that can actually work that classroom so they get the actual reading skills they need. So if we're thoughtful, sensitive to the student, and determined that they're going to succeed, then we can get this done, and we need to get this done.
Well, you mentioned some of the onus is on parents. Sometimes that's not possible in certain homes. So then the onus turns to teachers, and there's accountability, and there's also more asked of our younger, I shouldn't say younger teachers in the younger grades. Is there not? Is there more accountability now?
And I think there is, but I'm not ready. I think part of what I talk about is the fact that we need to look at early childhood programs, and that may be from before preschool age. One of the things that I did in my previous school district was reach out and call every preschool provider for children, either public or private, and talk to them about the expectations coming into our school district. So they knew, it's not a surprise. It's also breaking down the barriers of turf that may exist between JFS agencies and the Department of Ed and mental health, and say, how do we work together to meet the needs of these families earlier so these students are better prepared when they come to school, so it doesn't put such a great burden on the teachers. I think all of those are important.
Would you agree that there is an incredible burden on the teachers now?
I think that there's very difficult expectations for teachers in some situations, but you know, as I look at the data and I see the reading gaps that exist with our poor, with our minorities, with our ESL students, you know, I said, you know, we're setting them on a pathway that's not going to be successful unless we make a dramatic change. And that's what I want, and whatever we need to do to make sure that happens. And one of the things the superintendent's talked about is unfunded mandate. Said this is more money. I said, well, you know, how much time do you spend teaching reading in your first grade? And they'll say 60 or 90 minutes. I said, well, what's it cost you to do 150 minutes? Is that more money? Is that additional teachers, or is that changing what happens in the classroom for that period of time?
There's more focus on reading. It is more focus on reading. And it's interesting, one of your quotes is that there will never be enough money.
And indeed, you know, there is never going to be enough money to meet all the needs. And when I was in the governor's office, I did a chart to show the relationship between student learning and spending. And you know what it looked like? A snowstorm. There's just, after a certain level, there's just no correlation. And that's one of the great reasons, and one of the reasons that we've come up with the Straight A Fund. It's a $250 million fund that is designed to promote and drive and encourage changes in a school that will focus on student learning at higher levels, efficiency and effectiveness. But the one thing that's different than most grants in this is the fact that it has to be sustainable. So school districts need to look within themselves and say, what are we doing and spending money on that isn't quite as effective as it should be?
Okay, and that goes, it's called the Straight A Fund. It's $250 million.
That's correct.
That schools are eligible. It's a matter of they have to write grants, be eligible, and I want to talk more about the Straight A Fund. We're going to take a break when we come back, and also the change in the way we grade our schools.
Yes.
Excellence with distinction, gone. We'll come back in just a minute with Dr. Richard Ross, Superintendent of Ohio Public Schools, right after.